How are you doing, Chezi? Think you're muted.
Thank God, Ben. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well.
So you were riding horses with your nieces? What was this?
Yeah, my niece and my nephew. I wasn't riding the horse; they were riding the horse, or
Is
at
this a
least my
pony or
nephew.
is this their horse?
A horse. And my niece was supposed to ride as well, but she was too scared. It was her first time, I think, on a horse and not on a pony being like ridden, um, held. So she was she got a little scared. She decided to stay back. So I stayed with her.
Do you need to wear the hat? Like the helmet hat situation?
Did they need to do that?
Yeah.
Yeah, like a helmet. Yeah.
I don't know. Once you have that on, it's like less cool for me. Like I want to be able to like ride like, kind of like a cowboy.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, also using the stairs to get up on the horse. I don't know if you do that. Like, so, there's a lot of liability
Right.
uh,
Of course.
tweaks that make it, that make it a little less. That removes some of the allure.
I hear that. And how long is your family visiting for?
They were like for 5 days. So this is actually my sister's family that moved to the States just a few months ago from Israel. So they're relocated temporarily here, and then so they came to visit me as well.
So great to have family though over.
Yeah, it was really nice. Yeah, because I saw them not too long ago around Rosh Hashanah,
Uh-huh.
and now they came back and now they're here. So yeah, it's cool to be able to see family more often.
Wow, what a privilege. I'm very, very happy to hear that. So I hope they have a fantastic time together.
Yeah.
All right, let's get cracking.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, nice. You have it on screen. And we are chapter 3, section 14.
Yeah. I just wanted us to have a look at the last one we did as well.
Right, Rabbi Akiva. We had about these fences that we built. We were also talking about how these are fences are not necessarily things that keep you away. Rather, it's like an internal fence that allows you to actually, that kind of control allows you to elevate yourself. So it's not really keeping you away, but it's rather than you allowing you to get closer in a certain way to proper orientation. And we were talking about how we ended it with Siag l'chokhmah shtika, the safety fence for wisdom is silence. And we were talking about how that allows you to be in this place where you are hearing different opinions, right? And that allows you to discern now that you have more options in front of you and different vantage points. And we also spoke about how in this silence, and this was also like in reference to laughter in a certain extent, but it allows you to get to this point where you no longer know what to say because you have been challenged. And while there's through laughter, like we said earlier on, the rabbis would use that mechanism sometimes to allow them to go into a place where it's sort of like limitless and maybe come up with like a new idea, right? And then we said earlier on, jesting and frivolity, accustomed to those two things together, are a problem. While you could have jesting used for the good, but here in the end, when we talk about silence, here too, we could say that when you get to that point that you don't know, that's a point where you want to be quiet and listen and hear and understand how you could then move to the next phase and understand something or comprehend something in a more in a deeper level and a more concise level as well. So. And as they say, on one foot, al regel achat. That's a little what we were discussing.
Right.
Okay. Right. This is B'Tselem. So just in general, obviously, we're gonna this one and the next one afterwards, I believe, talk about deep concepts. So there could be classes just like on specific lines over here. So I think obviously we'll touch upon these things, but we're still going to hit about them on sort of like a a general level. Hu haya omer, who is Rabbi Akiva, as we said. חביב אדם שנברא בצלם, חיבה יתרה נודעת לו שנברא בצלם, שנאמר כי בצלם אלוהים עשה את האדם. חביבין ישראל שנקראו בנים למקום, חיבה יתרה נודעת להם שנקראו בנים למקום, שנאמר בנים אתם לאדוני אלוהיכם, בנים אתם לאדוני אלוהיכם. חביבין ישראל שנתן להם כלי חמדה, חיבה יתרה נודעת להן שנתן להם כלי חמדה, שנאמר כי לקח טוב נתתי לכם תורתי אל תעזובו. And in English, we have over here, he would also say, beloved is a man, for he was created in the image of God. It is a sign of even greater love that has been made known to him that he was created in the image, as it says, for the image of God, he made man. Beloved are Israel, for they are called children of God. It is a sign of even greater love that has been made known to them that they are called the children of God. As it is stated, you are children of the Lord your God. Beloved are Israel, for they are given a precious article. It is a sign of even greater love that they have been made known to them that it was given a precious article. As it is stated, I have given you a good purchase. My Torah, do not forsake it. Beautiful. All right. So, off the bat, I think we see over here, there's like different categorizations, right? We're calling, there's man, there's Israel, but looking at them as banim. So we have like children, we have tselem over here, and we also have like this kli chemda. So there's like these different levels that we see over here, which I'm sure we'll get into as we break it down. But so one is, different concepts of this word tselem, the image of God. As they say, Gio nishpach v'kul masun nishberu. A lot of ink has been spilled on these kind of concepts. But there are obviously different takes. One of them would be understanding that there is a unification of soul and body. And this would be like the Maharal, which is a more Kabbalistic understanding, which is this recognition, this tselem is in a sense, this soul and body connection, unification that allows it to, in a certain sense, resemble what God is trying to have us experience through him. Rambam would say that this is the fact that we are aware of this, right? This is the extra gift. This is already in the interpretation they have in the translation of English over here, which is consciousness in a certain way. The tselem is the fact that we are aware of this, that we could comprehend in this fashion is that tselem in a certain sense. There are interpretations that the tselem is that the creatures of the world are aware that man is an image, that we're different in a certain sense, that it's sort of a pronouncement to the world itself. There is also a sense that we're talking about this is like an early stage of like us being an offspring of Hashem and we're created. And this is, these are like the first fruits sort of that God creates. This is the tselem. And obviously there's like, God is very joyful about this experience that he made this tselem that in a certain way resembles his image. And there's that joyful sense that God is very happy about the fact that there's divinity inside man that could resemble him as well. There's a sense also that we should focus on the idea of Adam that it talks about here of man. And while there are some that interpret this being specifically talking about, still talking about the Jews, Tosfot and others look at this as speaking about all mankind. And also the verses later on speak about like Israel. So there's also a sense that like this is clearly talking about all mankind. Mm-hmm. And there's this sense that we're talking about man and later on we're talking about Israel. But generally speaking, there's the understanding that even the non-Jews still have a sense where they could level up still. And, there's a concept of conversion, right? So like, it's not that the soul itself is limited for some like genetic reason. The Chibaya Torah is the idea that Israel is being singled out for this, but it's still an invitation for all mankind, in a sense.
And this is still all of that still just for the first one, or
all this is still for the first one. We're just talking about the fact that there's tselem, the image, the fact that we're talking about this chibaya terah. So we're still talking about that essence. There's the Ramchal believes that the tselem, the image, is free will. That is where the image presents itself in a certain the way he interprets it, at least. There's also, it mentions over here that this is from Genesis 9:6, but we have we have an earlier verse where we talk about God's image as well, and it's a question like why we don't talk about it earlier. However, this specific verse is in the context of murder, and the idea is that Rabbi Akiva wants to stress the point that I could have said it earlier, but the fact that I'm saying it now is talking about the fact that there's a chibaya terah, that there's this extra element of it, that the image is so important, and there's a ramification to that. There's also like a halachic ramification to that, which is like you can't murder, right? It's so important that you must keep this. It's sacred. So I would say that will be a small explanation of, let's say, this first verse with regards to like the image of God, or what Rabbi Akiva is trying to speak to us over here.
Right. So I mean, so there's like, as to your last point, it mentions it in the context of murder, and it says how important it is that man was created in the image of God, but also the fact that, like, doubly important, chovayet terah, for the fact that you are aware of that fact.
Correct.
It was made. So it's like, I mean, I guess we have discussions about that when we talk about tshuva, or where people are at and how they engage with Judaism, or the things that they can do, and there is importance for what they know, and how intentionally are they rebelling or disagreeing or doing the things that they are doing. So like the kavanah. So that sounds like in the same vein as well.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, that hits all the general ideas we discussed in this first section over here, which is, if man's intention, then you need to have obviously consciousness and awareness of that. And if man's intention, obviously, then you also are touching upon the idea of free will. So all these things are obviously intertwined, and in a certain way, that is also like the additional love. It's where you have this beautiful mix of different possibilities through the concept of the image of God. So then we move on and we say, Chavivin Yisrael shenikru banim lamakom. So here, like we said earlier, we were talking about Selem. Here we talk about Banim, right? Children. So this is in a certain sense like a second stage where it's more than just like having a Selem, which is like more general, right? There's like man. There's now a son. There's something that has there's like a legacy sense. And when God goes to Abraham and says, because I see you're going to teach this onto your kids and to your sons, right? This is where the Hebrew story starts, where Israel starts. Up until now, God was sort of searching out in the world, right? There's some failed attempts with Noach, with Hanoch, and there was an image, but we got to a place where that image in a certain way gets corrupted, right? We have the flood. And then again, we have another search which comes to the Hebrew. And so we're talking Banim. There's a sense that it's like it's not the general sense of man that has God's image. It gets a little more focused with it's now a son with the image of God that is continuing a certain lineage, a certain a path, a legacy forward. And
very interesting. You kind of remind me. This is a little bit of a tangent, but I was just listening to somebody talking about a rabbi talking about Abraham, and it's Chayei Sarah, the parasha for the week, and it talks about how Abraham also marries um,
Torah.
Torah. And so the rabbi was talking about this this dual motivation, if I can call it, Abraham's motivation of, I need to create nations. I want to have a legacy of nations that will know about God, but there's also that legacy, that specific legacy of that will go through Isaac. And this is more specific. And Sarah is more like our mother from a Jewish perspective, of like she has one son, and then her legacy, and how that kind of interacts with Abraham. And obviously they have a little bit of conflict when we talk about Isaac and Ishmael. So that was very interesting, because in Abraham, you said like it didn't work when you kind of like we tried, or God tried with like a few different versions. If we take that from the Matrix as well, I'm thinking about that.
Right.
And then in Abraham, there is this kind of like this balance of like, okay, we are going to work in two movements. So that's interesting. It kind of reminded me of that.
I mean, just following up, dovetailing on your little tangent, I spoke about this I think on my channel. There's like these videos on the weekly portion, so I allude to this. Both I focus a little on the tension between Isaac and Ishmael, but just with regards to Abraham's universal mission, that also has to do with Lech Lecha, which was the portion 2 weeks ago. And the verses mention that Abraham leaves once and then leaves again, and then there's a sense where he's doing it for specifically the mission that God is giving him, which is ultimately going to find its way through Isaac. And then there's his universal mission. Well, you could also look at this in both as individual and universal. But there's another mission which has to do with the rest of the world. That all the people of the world nations of the world will be blessed by you. So there's a whole sequence of events that is connected to that. There's et hanefesh asher asa b'Haran. There's these souls that he already cultivated in Haran, which have been learning this more, let's say, universal version of monotheism. There's him going down to Egypt and with his wife, and there's a whole sense over there of, from Kabbalistic point of view, of identifying and raising the sparks, where he's going to the place, the empire of the world at that time, and trying to bring out the universal message with him, just like his descendants are going to do eventually again when they leave Beruchush Gadol. Like the same thing is told to Abraham, that he's going to leave with I don't know what the exact translation is in English, but with like wealth and treasure, and that means like more in a spiritual, theological sense. And there's even a sense where he's not even sure when he marries Hagar. And the Midrash identifies this as the daughter, the princess from Egypt. So again, there's a sense of him thinking this is happening through this universal Yishmael message. And ultimately that gets resolved at Mount Moriah when he goes with him and Eliezer and Ishmael, but ultimately it's both of them go up. And there's a dramatic scene when for the first time Isaac calls his father, father, and he calls his son, son, and they both recognize that there's that sense. And they're both required, Isaac representing justice and reverence, and Abraham representing grace, chesed. Both of them create Jacob, which is Tiferet, and then on we go. But as you said, there was a little tangent. You could respond to that if you have any comments. But
no, I'm still mulling it over. I'm in mid story with the rabbi that I'm listening to, and it's right. very interesting. But I thought it was fitting here as well, that movement.
Oh, definitely, and you see that. There's this also has to do with the whole, I think the whole Noahide movement, basically, which is there's a sense which is there is obviously Jacob, and this is his channel. He'll disagree with this. We've been having a conversation about this recently, but like I believe that that the fact that Israel has come back to its place, its nation, its land, and it could now finally, in a certain sense, represent itself after 2,000 years, right? So there's a sense now we could finally have that discussion, which is more about the universal message, which is talking about all of us, coming together. And there isn't, not everyone needs to convert, because everyone does have their own pathway. And ultimately, as the prophets say, all these nations to become part of God's, they're all God's nations, which is not unique to Israel.
Mm-hmm.
There's a sense of everyone leveling up in different ways, but for right now, we'll leave it that we're all welcome in God's home. Okay. Hala. Where were we? Oh yeah, we were talking about Chavivin Israel. So the fact that they have also this, like I said, there's like this father relationship. So that's obviously, with parents, we talk about unconditional love. And then in a certain sense, when we use the terms gula, it's called like this unconditional love that God has specifically to his son. And we'll see this pattern will continue, but there's a difference between God's relationship with individuals and God's relationship with the collective. And there's a sense that all individuals, we're also told in the Talmud that like the Gentile could get to the high, could reach the level of the high priest, right? So holiness could be found through the individual, and other world religions offer that. There's a sense where, as a collective, Israel is offering, or Israel as a collective could be holy as well. Vayamachanecha kadosh, your whole camp would be holy, and there's like another dimension over there. But there's the fact also that we're called sons. There is a disagreement in classic fashion between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, whether are we always considered sons, or when we're not behaving appropriately, are we not considered sons? So Rav Meir believes that we're always considered sons, and Rabbi Yehuda says that no, if we're not behaving properly, we're not. And generally speaking, the halacha goes to according to Rav Yehuda, but the Rashba believes that they're both correct, but they're both talking about the individual and the collective. As individuals, if you transgress, then God doesn't have to necessarily see you as a son at that point. There could be like a severing of that connection. As far as the collective, Israel's always considered the son in their father's eyes, and there's this unconditional love.
And why is it important to make that? Why is there a change in dynamics? Why is the collective different than the individual?
Well, I think that there is a conversation that God is having with, like we just said, with like the Tselem, right? Mm-hmm. And there's Chavivin Israel is now talking about the collective already. As far as Israel, the Tselem has a relationship with God. They all bear God's image,
right?
And an individual could cultivate a relationship with God, but what God is trying to do through Abraham is show what it looks like when you have an individual that is living properly, right? He's getting to this level of the high priest, but he's managing to do that with his neighbors as well, right? So he's love your neighbor as yourself. He's managing to do that well. And all the things we're learning over here, right? So this collective now is doing this well, and they know how to learn in the right time and know how to balance between being between joking and between being frivolous about it. And they know how to do that as a community that governs as a city that gets all the way to a nation. And that is what God is trying to, through the nation of Israel as the priestly class to the nations, is trying to embody. And that's why there's a difference between the collective and the individual. Yes, this is why it relates to what I said earlier about the converts, which is there isn't this magical soul necessarily. Rather, there's this, you're connecting to a covenant. You are, as an individual, you're locking yourself in to the collective right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, that was very interesting.
Also, if you think about it, when we talk a lot about what happens to the individual, we talk about this in chapter 2. There was a lot of focus about if you do certain acts, you get removed from the society, you get removed from the world. And like, that's the big fear, that you find yourself alone as an individual. And how long can you survive as an individual if you're trying ultimately to, see God in like, if you're made in God's image, the place you're going to see God is in the image of other people, and that's happening as a group. And that goes all the way back to obviously the 10 people that are learning together and what we're trying to do as a community.
Yeah, it's interesting. Kind of connects to actually a discussion that I've had with my sister actually about, or some of the discussions that I think come up from the Tanya, and how they're talking about concepts more like the more mystical concept. Let's call it, like talking about the soul and the connection through that.
Knesset Israel.
Yeah, and in some way, I mean, there is always the category inside of me, or just like the devil's advocate, I guess. Or I'm trying to like even asking the question, why is it necessary for me to think about something, to have a connection, to have like to think of a connection between me and another person through the soul? Like, why can't I understand that through just the concept of like this worldly concept more, and not something mystical that maybe I can't relate to some people, because maybe they won't necessarily understand it. Maybe something more, maybe why not just use something more contextual in terms of, okay, they are in my group, well, like we're having discussions about, whether it be politics or kind of like neighborhood discussions, or things that you're interested in or not interested, how to raise kids or how not to raise them. So anyway, what I was talking about my sister is something about, there is this sense that, especially talking about something like a soul, it does have this more like more bigger, like you call it a collective. It's more, I don't know if it's more flexible, and more, I don't know if I can articulate it well, but there's always kind of like you as an individual, you can disconnect yourself from certain people, but to the group that you belong to, you will always have a spark, or a thread that you will be able to kind of reignite or connect back to. And I think that's what something like a concept like the soul kind of allows you to do.
You think the concept of the soul allows you as an individual to connect back to the collective, because through the soul, I can be connected always through, through my soul bandwidth, right? My soul Wi-Fi. I could connect back into that bandwidth.
Yeah, because it's something that's bigger than you. So it's bigger than you. So it's not something I think it's kind of like our discussion about like things that you can control or understand from a rational position as an individual, and then things that maybe collectively that define you, that you cannot necessarily, you don't have the just a computational power to understand, or it's just like across time, it's just too hard for you to do.
Yeah, well, this is, I mean, this is not necessarily unique to Jews, obviously, but being part of the collective allows you to tap into that, like, right, that brain palace, that traditional wisdom, and really that obviously is extremely powerful. Uniquely, maybe not uniquely Jews, but obviously Jews have a very long history of cultivating this wisdom. So this is obviously a very, as they say, the Torah, right, is an etz chaim, a tree of life, a machazikim, to those who grasp and hold on to it.
Yeah.
So while a tree could grow and grow branches, and you could have but you obviously have to be connected to this tree. So I hear what you're saying. Obviously, that's looking at it even more from like a sociological sense. And an evolutionary sense, you could look at it, right? You don't have to necessarily like evoke a soul, but like
yeah,
I said,
I mean, like why? Sorry, I mean, in our discussion, I'm trying to make this more understandable, but like in our discussion, let's say in our context of like putting into context of like, let's say what is happening now in Israel as well. Some of the things that people say that you can do. Some of the things that people say that you can do is obviously you can just help the people around you. You can donate money. Let's say I'm talking from somebody that is in the US, in Israel. But then somebody would tell you something like, and obviously I'm talking from a secular, let's say I'm talking from a secular position, you can wear tefillin, for example, you can light candles on Shabbat. And when I think about that, that is what I think is like connecting to the soul, because part of what is could be helpful in that is that what you're doing is you're not connecting to a specific person, but you're making the Jewish soul in this context more robust as a group, and you're making sure that every edge of that soul, let's say it's like a big circle, is lit up, or there's like a more connections. Let's say it's just so that's what So sometimes you think, okay, how can I help, like, physically in like to this person or that person, and then tefillin. One way that you can think about it is that it just helps you to keep the soul alive, the group, your connection to this whole group, which is, and tefillin and those kind of things are older than us, obviously, older than just me and you and our grandparents and their grandparents. It's something that connected Jews, a certain group, for a very, very long time. So that's how you kind of like make sure that you are connected to that.
So I'll just, because what you said reminded me something. I want to try, I see if I can connect this, but it reminded me of this conversation I was having also with Yosef and Jacob with regards to Israel. But Rav Kook, in his book Orot and in other places, he discusses how there's a chutzpah of this generation, but he talks about how this chutzpah of this generation that is manifests in the idea that it's the secularism and the fact that they're not accepting the yoke of Torah in a certain extent. He says this rebelling is because there's a sense that we want to be able to do it ourselves. And this alludes also to a verse where talks about how God took us out of Egypt by our hand, which is alluding to the fact that we sort of had to be forced, right? Mm-hmm. And the verse ends with ultimately we're going to make this choice out of our own hearts. And Rav Kook talks about how he talks about, or we'll use an example, how the pilot that is flying for Israel right now, right? He is fighting for Zion, for Israel, for its people through the generations. Like, that is very, very worthy. What we don't want, or at least what I don't want, or seemingly what Rav Kook didn't want, wasn't that someone now will say, to help, I'm going to put on tefillin, right? And I'm not going to do this flying of the plane stuff. I'm going to focus on doing this tefillin, and this is how it's going to work. And for a lot of people, like, doing that deed, right, or putting on tefillin or lighting the menorah, how does that help with like world hunger or with climate change? Right? Like, it's not like, it's not big enough. But what you're mentioning and what Rav Kook is mentioning is that this pilot, what we should see is that they are wanting in the world, even the social justice warriors, even the woke people, they are trying in a certain sense, and obviously it could go very wrong. Yeah. But from a macro perspective, we are trying to see how it's all interconnected. We can't talk about the intersectionalities, talking about that, how all these things basically meet up. And we need to talk about how justice for the people and how this is the counterliners are affecting those people. And like, we're trying to find all these different connections out there in the world because we're really, really trying to hit these things on a much bigger level. And I want the pilot to realize that through his work, through him being a pilot or a mailman or a teacher, they'll want to connect and recognize that even the phylacteries, themselves are also the part of the interconnective elements as well. And that allows you then to connect, like you said, that allows you to anchor your connectivity. Because yes, you still need to be doing all this stuff. You need to be fighting. You need to be doing everything you can for global warming, and you need to do everything you do for world hunger. But if you want to anchor yourself through a passive orientation, then yes, those practices, those traditions that you're doing are constantly allowing you to feel connected to your group and feel part of a collective because they've been doing it for all those years. And that kind of energy can now push you forward to doing it. And that's why I fly. And that's why I do this. And that's why I do that.
Right. Yeah. Actually, so I just thought of, I just thought of an example for Christian listeners too. Something that I remember Peugeot talking about when Jesus gets is when there's a woman that uses perfume and puts it gives it to Jesus, and I think maybe does something to his feet, anoints him, and then somebody tells him, like, why didn't you use that expensive perfume to maybe give to the poor? That would make more sense. I think that is the same discussion that we're having here, in terms of there is a time or there is a space to fight world hunger or do things in the physical world, in the specific context, and then there are things where you want to worship something that is above them, so you can sustain the purpose itself. So yeah.
And that's what Jonathan Peugeot was basically talking about in his conversation in the Ark. I don't know if you saw that one.
Yeah.
And he, alludes, he's like, what's our point of orientation, right? What's at the top of the hierarchy?
Mm-hmm.
And, if it's tefillin and what's connected to tefillin, right? The source behind tefillin. So, all is one. And because all is one, you're doing this. And tefillin is a great example. I put it on, and the verses and the parchments that are inside and the verses that I say are recognizing that, that all unity in multiplicity, all of that together. And that is how you want to start your day when you want to now take on these titanic elements that the world and the social world needs to deal with. But you're doing it from a point of recognizing automatically that we're all connected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And by the way, it turns back around, as we mentioned in the past. Seeing how it's all interconnected and zooming all the way out to the planets and Mars could feel very, very, very daunting, right? But that's why once you recognize that and you say, like, well, God created all this for me, and I'm in that tselem, right? I'm in this image that can recognize this. So because, you could do like this zoom out. I'm terrified, but because I realize I am terrified, I go back to realizing that there's an I, and I could start my day with modeh ani, I thank God, right? So
Mm-hmm.
like I had to recognize that I'm really part of the whole cosmos, and recognizing that allows me to realize that, but I'm also me that can now have a relationship with God as an individual as well.
Yeah.
Okay, onwards. Chavivin, yes, Chavivin, if you could scroll down a little. Chavivin Yisrael shenatan lahem kli chemda, chiba yetera nodat lahem shenatan lahem kli chemda, shebo nivra haolam, shene'emar ki lekach tov natati lachem, torati al ta'azovu. And this is something that we sing often in synagogue, and it's definitely it's a favorite of one of my favorites. So this is like the third stage. So we talked about how there's the image, and then we talked about how there's the son, right? So we have this unconditional love for the son, and now we're talking about the fact that he's giving us these. What is the translation in English? A precious article, right? So this is alluding to the Torah, but in a larger sense, back to these levels of like image and son, and this precious article, which is God has created this whole universe, also part of his love, that connects well and fits well with the son, right? So he has a guidebook, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
which will allow him to interact with his world. And there's a sense where there's this division, right? There's God in heaven, so to speak, and us out in the world. And even though there's this image, and even though we're his sons, ultimately there's this disconnect, right? We can never fully fathom him. We're far away from him. So, that doesn't sound like the ideal. However, when the land you're on and the world you're created comes together with the Torah, that allows you to look at the world through this divine prism, that allows you then obviously to connect back and sanctify obviously nature, even in a certain sense, and bring it back up to God. And that is why it's sort of that we've created a child, and you have a child. So there's that first essence when you're like, wow, I'm holding the baby in the room. And then there's the sense where like, there's the image, then there's the sense that I'm holding the baby in the room. And then there's the sense where the baby comes home, and the the baby room is already set, and there's the little diapers over there, and there's all the stuff that are already all prepared for this child to have the best possible chance at success. So when they come out, the house is baby proofed, right? And there's these fences and there's stuff, there's this whole world that God has created for us to allow us to succeed if we so choose. The fact that it also mentions like that this is part of the world that was created, we always talk about the fact that God looked, there's a famous midrash that God looked at the Torah and created the world. And the Maharal looks at this as saying that there's the structure of the universe, it's its own Torah, and through that structure, God then gives like a rule book for us to live our life. In a sense, like when an architect, like in my sense, like an architect, like I make the plans first, and then I implement the plans on the ground, right? So it's not like I just start building, rather I create myself a certain set of guidelines and a whole structure, and then I implement that structure on the ground. And
right, a prototype.
Correct. And you could even see this. There's a famous line of Rav Nachman that says, "Va'afilu ba'astara shebatoch ha'astara bevadai gam sham malvush Hashem yitbarach." Even when God is hidden and turning His face from us and deeply, deeply hidden, we don't see Him. Even there, even in that vacuum, clearly God is there as well. And there's a sense that you also see this in Noah. Generally, we think that God gives this sign, right, between man and him about the rainbow. And he says, when you see the rainbow, right, I'm not going to destroy the world anymore. But if you look at the verses carefully, first of all, it mentions v'haya ba'ananei ha'anan. It doesn't mention the cloud once, but rather like in the thicket of the cloud. And that's when you're going to see the rainbow, which is sort of counterintuitive. When the clouds are fully out there, that's not when I'm seeing the rainbow necessarily, when it's buried inside. And God is constantly talking about the few verses he's talking about it as he himself is seeing it. And it's not necessarily for man to see, rather it's to remind God. So it's in a sense that even if we don't necessarily see God in the world, God is telling us that, like, I'm always there, even in those hidden depths where you don't see me. The fact that there's the rainbow, the fact that there's this consistency to the world, the fact that I created this universe with these rules is also a reminder to me that, like, to myself, to know that I'm always in this world and I'm always involved in this world. Yeah. So this just on that idea over there. I think we'll move on. Or you want to dig in a little deeper, but like I said, these are all like very dense.
Yeah. No, I think that's good. I was trying to see if I have something.
All right. Okay. This one also. This little one is, it's a heavy hitter. Hakol tzafui ve'arashut netuna ubetov ha'olam nadon. All is foreseen, and freedom of choice is granted. The world is judged with goodness, but in accordance with the amount of man's positive deeds, right? So we have all these inconsistencies, these over here, things that negate each other. So everything is foreseen. All is foreseen. So there's a sense, because we understand God is God, so he knows everything. Everything is created from him. He is all one, so he's aware of all the things that are out there. The world is created like ex nihilo, and we have the 10 utterances, the Asara Ma'amarot, that God created the world from. And because it's all created from God speaking, ultimately he's aware of all these things as well. And this also goes back to the idea that there's the image of God, that that everything is ultimately connected in the complexity, which is the image. It's all the image of God. So all these things are, if they're all him, then everything is foreseen. Yeah. But then we are hit with this verashut netuna, and I would say the first thing would seem sort of counterintuitive. I mean, not counterintuitive. Would seem like a prerequisite, obviously, that God is all knowing and that's everything is all foreseen. But then we're told that the freedom of choice is granted, right? So we have this permission to live and do what we want. So we have to see how we square their circle. I would say that this has a strong resemblance, in a certain sense, to the particle and the wave, right? And we have like a superposition, and these are two things that are both at the same time. And there's also a sense of like how, your vantage point, how you're perceiving them, and in what context are you perceiving them, and how are you categorizing these things. And right, talking about the observation of this thing, and then that sort of locks it down. So we have a sense over here where the permission is giving, as in going back to this concept of the tree and the roots, as in there's a system of roots, and within that system you have flexibility. So we have this unrestricted free will, but it's happening within the boundaries of the general framework that God is giving us.
Right. So there are specific. It can either be a wave or a particle, but you have the choice to decide what is it? What is it going to be?
Correct.
Simplification, right? Which is the same. Which is the same as saying it's either life and death, and your choices, and you have the choice to decide which one.
Right. So we have God allows like the human we could act both for good and for harm or evil. And we could also go against like the divine powers that God has given us. And this tool of like creation is really allows us to make like destructive things, and allows us to obviously help humanity. And this is very apropos with regards to obviously AI, right? Which is like we're sort of creating something, and it itself also has these ideas of it could cause a tremendous amount of destruction. It could cause a tremendous amount of good as well. As well. The Tzemach Tzedek mentions that. I mean, and we all asked this question. We were like, 13 about can God create a rock that he can't pick up? Mm-hmm. So the Tzemach Tzedek says, yes, the stone that God can't lift is free will, right? So God is making, going back to the architect analogy. So I wrote the plans. So they're my plans, but on my plans, I decided that this is where the electric box is going to go. And because I decided that, then the water point can't go over there, because I already decided that that's where that's going to go. So, And I already decided that I'm not ripping up the plans, right? Because I already did that with the flood. Right. And then I made a promise that the project's always going to flow, right? Because otherwise the clients are going to be too nervous. I can't do anything if you're going to tell me that every day there could be a destruction. I can't move forward in life. So no, don't worry. The project is going to flow. Then there was another version of that with Dome, or with Saturn, where there I got rid of the kitchen, right? We had to completely redo the kitchen. It just wasn't working. The way I did the plumbing over there, they just weren't getting it. But from then on, right, that's not really the discussion. Now we're talking about building homes, and there's a ways how to build those homes. The tools are there. You could decide now to put your electrical socket at the right height according to code, right? And doing that, generally speaking, will allow you to avoid house fires. It's at the general place where most people want to click the light on, and it's the most comfortable for people, and it allows for the feng shui of the house as well. You could also decide to put your sockets inside the shower, and you'll probably get electrocuted. And if that's the life you want to live, then you have that freedom, obviously within those bounds. But there's going to be results to those decisions.
Right, and I think this is kind of like when you deconstruct things, when you think about things, when you think, okay, I can interpret things however I want. Then the realization is that actually, yes, there are multiple interpretations for every single thing that you can think of, but in a certain context, with the physical constraints or whatever other constraints you have limited possibilities. Limited could mean a lot, but they're limited in terms of, like you said, if you're putting the electric box somewhere, you probably don't want to put anything that has anything to do with plumbing.
Right. And there's a sense where you continue with this analogy, right? You have like a master plumber. He wrote the book about plumbing.
Yeah.
However, if I give him a call right now and say, like, I need you to come down to fix it, just because he wrote the book about plumbing doesn't mean he knows the exact scenario that I'm dealing with, like at that moment. And like the Ralbag, which is a pretty far out idea out there, says that God, because of the structures that he built, right? And this also has to do with obviously his retraction in a certain sense. He doesn't know fully what's going to happen, because he uses the phrase from the verse from Sdom also, where it says that God, I'll come down and see what's going on in Sodom, because I hear her cries, and I'll come and see whether they need to be destroyed or not, and then I'll know. And there's a sense like, what do you mean I'll come down and I'll check and I'll know? You're God. But there's a sense where like, I'm allowing this to play out based on the rules that I said, and I don't know. Like, let's see what happens. Like, it could be that they took all those tools that I gave them with the book I wrote, but they totally
delegated.
Yeah, correct. They made like this nuts thing right now. So like, well, let's see what's going on with this. Mm-hmm. And again, also like with the perspective, and so God wants to see how we play it out. So there's the 10 Commandments, first round, right? God is talking to Moses. He's like, you're going to love it based on the rules I built. This is the Torah you're getting right now. And then we have the golden calf, right? But from another perspective, you could say God also always wanted us to have the rule book, which is the second tablets, the second Torah. So in a certain sense, one is like bediavad and one lechatchila. So one is like, in general, I wanted to have the first Torah. But because I'm aware of many different options, because they were going to sin, I get to now to complete like another version, which is a success. As in, like we talk about like different timelines. I had a timeline when it was Torah number 1, but that went, and now I have success through Torah number 2. And that allowed us to now move into that timeline, basically. Yeah. But they have the choice of those timelines. All right. Right. So we say that the world is judged with goodness, but in accordance with the amount of man's positive deeds. So here too, we have these two lines that are contradicting each other. And as we were mentioning before, you could look at these as individual and collective, right? Which is, again, like as the collective, God sees us as good. God doesn't want to destroy us anymore, right? That we're all ultimately together moving towards moving forward. However, as an individual, right, that goes according to the amount of our positive deeds, right? So that's, again, speaking to us. And that's why, again, we could lose the name Banim. We could lose the name, we could lose sons, but not as a collective. That doesn't happen over there.
That's a little bit like arguing in good faith. Like, I'm going to listen to your argument and I'm going to judge it by its content, but I'm going to start from a position where I assume that you're intelligent or that you're making a point that you're trying to be logical. Right. So, yeah.
And like you said, good faith is also, it goes both ways. You're good faith because the assumption is this is what you believe you're saying and about yourself. And there is an interpretation which Rova Maaseh goes as in, how do you see yourself ultimately? When you look in the mirror, do you see yourself, I'm generally good? And that, in a certain sense, God takes that into consideration as well. Like, what's your context when you're coming and saying these things and trying? Are you ultimately also seeing yourself as doing that as well? And we're saying God is obviously ruling according to chesed and trying not to rule through din, as when he's talking about the collective. There's we could see over here the idea of it's all about the effort, right? It's about what we're putting inside into this as well. And it's also letting you know about two of these things. It's betuva olam nidon. Generally speaking, there is good, but God also allows us, and there's also the concept of evil in the world. So God is saying, like, you could do specific evil things, like the amount of deeds you're doing, you could end up doing evil elements. However, there's sort of like a positive self-destruct system, because God is saying ultimately everything's good. So even the things that are bad, they end up damaging themselves ultimately, because they're just damaging the bad that's left inside the good, relatively speaking. So the bad things that you're going to do, ultimately at the end of the day, over time, are not going to cause destructive harm. So
right, they're non-productive. They're self-defeating.
Correct, exactly. They're self-defeating. Okay, let's move on to the next.
Yep. Good.
Yeah, I guess we'll end with this one. Hu haya omer, and again we're talking about our Rabbi Akiva. Hakol natun בעירבון, ומצודה פרוסה על כל החיים, החנות פתוחה, והחנווני מקיף, והפנקס פתוח, והיד כותבת. וכל הרוצה ללוות, יבוא וילווה. והגבאים מחזירים תדיר בכל יום, ונפרעים מן האדם מדעתו ושלא מדעתו. ויש להם על מה שיסמכו, והדין דין אמת, והכל מתוקן לסעודה. He would say, everything is placed in pledge. And can you make that a little bigger?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And a net is spread over all the living. The store is open, the storekeeper extends credit. The account book lies open, the hand writes. And all who wish to borrow may come and borrow. The collection officers make their rounds every day and exact payment from man. With this knowledge and without his knowledge, with his knowledge and without his knowledge, their case is well founded. The judgment is a judgment of truth, and ultimately all is prepared for the feast. Very poetic, very beautiful. So what are we saying over here? Hakol natun be'iravon. So we're being told off the bat that like our actions are not, they're not without consequences ultimately, right? You're making a pledge over here, and they're saying pledge. You could look at it as a collateral that it also in a spiritual sense. You have to realize the things you're going to do, you're taking a collateral, and ultimately there's consequences to how you act. And there's interpretations that we're talking about over here that hakol, everything, means the person's body, the person's family. Like you have to realize everything is fair game at the end of the day. Like you're playing this at it's the highest stakes possible at a certain extent. So people have to realize that when they're thinking about these things. There are interpretations that say that hakol natun bi'ravon, everything, and iravon also means aravim, zebazeh, together, that we're all interconnected, and everything that people do affects the other person at the end of the day. Sort of an understanding of, let's say, a butterfly effect, and the fact that we're all responsible for each other. So not necessarily about this credit that you have or this collateral that you have, rather the fact that we're all interconnected. And there's also an interpretation that sort of connects to the last portion that we read, which is the collateral is the few good deeds that you're depositing. And the idea is that God is saying, I'm going to assume that this is how you're going to keep on behaving, or you're going to try to attempt to keep on behaving this way. But, you're taking obviously a risk. You're doing this at your own risk. And then we're told over here that the net is spread over all the living. Metzuda prusa al kol ha'chaim. So first off, you might think between your family or the government or your teachers, you could manage to get away from things. God is letting you know, no, with regards to the relationship with me and the Creator, the net is spread over all aspects. So there's no getting away from this in a sense.
What's Metzuda? What was that?
Right, so Metzuda means you could look at the Metzuda also as a castle, but it could also be a fortress, but also like a netting around and like a reshet. But the interpretation, and also from Tzeda to hunt, but the interpretation, generally speaking, is that the Metzuda the net is the evil inclination that's in all aspects of our life. It's in every corner. You're always dealing with these temptations, and they persist throughout your life, and they renew themselves continually. You're always going to have to deal with this netting that's around you, that seemingly is also limiting you from elevating yourself, from transcending yourself. And from every generation, you always have to deal with it. And evil also presents itself in every generation accordingly, right? It's not going to present itself. I'm sure there's similar trends, but there is evil that they were dealing with in in the 1800s, and there's emails that you're dealing with today, and they all have their own, they emerge differently, but they are connected to this general netting, this evil inclination that's around us all the time. And the fact that it's throughout your whole life also alludes to, there's temptations that you deal with as a child. There's temptations that you deal with when you're older. There's temptations that you deal with if you're rich and how to deal with that kind, or celebrity with that kind of pressures. And there's the temptations you deal with if you're poor. So they cover all aspects of life at the end of the day. Now, obviously begs a question, which is, we just said earlier that ultimately, betuv ha'olam nidon, right? The world is judged like by good. So what are we doing with like this evil inclination? And this brings us all the way back to one of the interpretations of why Adam eats from the tree, is because the tree of good and evil, Etz Hadat Tov Ra, is, if there wasn't evil inclination, I can't play the game with free will, and I can't play the game for real. Because if I don't have that evil inclination, then of course I'm going to pick the good. There's no question. God is telling Adam, you could eat from all the fruit over here. Of course, what other option do I have? That's like, I only see good. That's all I know what to do. So that's like what I'm going to do. But if I want to be able to go from this fruit and not this fruit, and I want to experience things, and I want to be able to make the choice for myself, then I need to recognize, I need to be able to see good and evil. And obviously I'm taking a risk doing that. But that is, in a certain sense, what we want to do, which allows us to then do the good deeds out of our own free will and allow us to actively and consciously come closer to God. So that separation is needed for us to actually move forward back towards Him.
Mm-hmm. And to make conscious choices, and to make specific choices. Yeah, I think Viveki once put it in a very nice way, that I just kind of remembered it, and I really, really liked it when I heard it. Is that if you, let's say you're buying a house, or let's say you're an architect and you're building a house, if you remove the constraints that you have, right? People want to remove constraints, and think about freedom in terms of just removing constraints. If you had no constraints, if you didn't need to eat, for example, you could just live without eating. If you didn't need to go to the bathroom, that you wouldn't even be able to design a house, because you wouldn't need a bathroom, you wouldn't need a kitchen. Like, you need those things because you have certain needs, because you have certain desires, and then they allow you to act in a specific context, to make specific choices, and then they enrich your life in a very specific way. So and that kind of really, to me, that kind of is another example of how these different constraints actually make you free to make certain choices of where am I gonna, if I'm an architect, I'm thinking, where am I gonna put things? What do I want to optimize for based on what needs, what desires I have, or what responsibilities or anything like that.
So I totally agree, and that I think collects nicely with our next line over here, which is hachanut ptucha ve'chenveni makif. The store is open, and the storekeeper extends credit. Obviously, there's the translation over here in a certain sense is correct, and obviously we're losing something in translation with regards to the Hebrew over here, which is Rabbi Akiva is using the analogy of the store, right? Which is a good analogy. The store is open. So first, on one level, it lets you know the fact that how like God is providing us like with everything we need, and He's extending this credit, which is like this opportunity for like growth and improvement, right? He's saying like, you could take a credit, you could grow, you could do what you want, and it obviously it's telling us about like this abundance of generosity that God is giving us. There's also the sense which, when it's a store, right? You could go to the junk section, you could go get your Coke, you could go get Whole Foods, like you could decide what you're getting from the store at the end of the day. And based on that, you're going to decide, like, we live in a world where, we buy luxury stuff that we don't need, we don't really want, or we don't really need, but these are decisions that God is saying you could put in your cart whatever you want. And so there's like this love, there's this abundance. And again, there's this sense of the freedom that you could be doing. But this goes back again to what we're saying, the constraints at the end of the day, right? Like, so there's like freedom, but it's happening within what? So we have v'chenvanim akif, and it's sort of the storekeeper. Not only is he extending credit, but hakafa means he's surrounding. And the idea that he's sort of moving around, which is there's it's sort of like this attribute of mercy, right? He's not immediately coming and attacking directly. He's creating this sort of circular hugging space around, where he's leaving room and patience, even for like people that are sinning. You can keep on filling up that slushy. I get it. He's like slowly circling, right? But unlike a shark that's like looking to kill, rather he's circling and giving you time. And but however, the fact that he's giving us store credit and the fact that he's circling does mean that at the end of the day, there is a certain limit. And, there's an account, and there's going to be a time when, the storekeeper wants to, have a conversation and know, what's due is due. Yeah. So there's a sense the hakafa is, that there's this space, but ultimately it does come close.
Yeah. And I'm old enough that I remember doing this in Netanya as a kid, of going to the store and buying stuff. And then we had my family had a card, right. and the storekeeper would take it out and he would write how much. He had this white and black spotted. I don't know if that's like the official, but yeah.
I know what you're talking about. The little box.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So they still have them today. Yeah.
So it's not only the storekeeper. I don't know. Maybe this will help us, but it's not only the storekeeper that knows what you're getting and the right amount and everything. It's also your mom that's going to come in, and then she's going to look and she's going to see, oh, he bought like 17 lollipops.
Right.
So.
That's a great analogy. Exactly. It's funny because we have one of those in our office, and they still use the same box, so it's hitting home. Okay. The account book lies open, and the hand writes. So again, this also let us know that there's God is in a certain sense record keeping, right? So there's even though it's just continuing, the storekeeper's extending the credit and walking around, and he has his account book open and he's writing down. So this is also it's representing sort of the spiritual account of our actions, right? So it's on the balance, and we're gonna have to see where you are. So we're continuing with the same analogy. The idea that the hand that writes, this is also alluding to different interpretations of what happens when you die, but that you get to see your whole life in front of you, and the angels ask you is this you? Did you do this? And you say yes, and they ask you to write down and sign. And it also has to do with the fact that you're telling God, Baruch Dayan Emet, you judge me fairly, or you the judge of truth, because I myself signed on this. I co-signed on what happened over here. So it's saying God's book is open, but ultimately you're the one that's writing it down, because you're there at all those moments. It's not that anyone forced you to do that. You had this freedom, and ultimately you're going to have to be the one when they're going to ask you, sir, is this your signature? And that's when you say, you could say you don't remember the email, whatever, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, they show you that, yes, it's that weird signature that only you have developed. Mm-hmm. So I think that's also that image of the hand that writes is very Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, right? Those days. V'chol harotzeh lilvot yavo v'yuveh. And in English, it's all who wish to borrow may come and borrow. So there's also the fact that God is just giving a tremendous amount of opportunities. It's doubling down on the credit idea, which is God's benevolence is there's no limit, right? So if you want to come, you can keep on borrowing. There's no conditions where you need to show me your ID, or you need to be this height, right? The bank is always open, and you could always come and borrow. Like we said, there later on, God is writing down, you're co-signing, he's looking around. You could decide that you want to decide to take CDOs and recognize that it's going to be a complete crash. You could also invest in things that make sense. But the bank is always open for business. However, at the same time, we're told about the collection officers make their rounds every day and exact payment from man with his knowledge, and without his knowledge, their case is well-founded, right? So we're saying over here that I would say like this emphasizes the fact that there's, again, accountability for your actions, and that like the whole universe, going back to the plans and the architect and all the mechanisms around it, ultimately reality is sort of lets you know to your face what's what, right?
Yeah.
So these actions are going to have an effect. So I mean, when I see like, a flag of Queers for Palestine, right? Like you could play with that thought experiment. You could also move there and see like how that works out for you. But ultimately, like your actions are going to have results on the ground. So if you like, and you could espouse certain things for a while, but you have to see how far those things take you.
Right. And I think that, exact payment without his knowledge, that aspect is also, I feel like it's really hard to see that, examples of that. Like sometimes you make decisions, and especially like throughout life, if you think about like people that are maybe, I know examples of people that are older, you make decisions when you're younger, and you don't understand how it's going to affect you when you get older. But then when you get older, you lose the ability to do certain things, and then you need to live with decisions that you've made as a young person. Physically, we can think about it in terms of like maybe you didn't exercise enough, and then when you're older, you're at a level where you can't repair something. You have to just live with the decisions that you've made, and you don't know that somebody exacted the payment from you until you actually are suddenly at a loss, right? And it's very hard to see people at that position. I mean, I think there's an aspect of that even in the current situation in Israel, even where it's like it's like sometimes you get to a point where, okay, now like we're at a position where we didn't know what was happening, or to some extent we did, to some extent we didn't.
Right.
But now it's like, okay, we need to live with the situation. We need to live with the decisions that we need to make based on this specific context. So yeah.
I agree. And the fact that you're saying that's very hard, right? That's like a hard thing to think about and sort of accept. We're being told that like, not only whether it was without your knowledge, their case is well-founded. The judgment is the judgment of truth. And ultimately, all is prepared for the feast. So, which is
Right.
That's what you're alluding to, which is like, we don't even realize, but there's a feast at the end of the day. Right. And they're saying like, listen, God is God, and he's God of truth. And the fact that like, there's these rules and like there's a cause and effect, like you're going to have to like deal with that at the end of the day. And at the end of the day is this meal. And that could be interpreted as like, the last meal you have, like as like, eventually you're going to die and like, you're going to have to answer the questions. It lets you know that, Hakol, whether it's the wicked or the righteous, ultimately everything comes down to this last meal. Everything concludes in a certain point. And this also alludes to the meal in the world to come, in the sukkah of the Leviathan, of the whale.
Mm-hmm.
So that we're all preparing for this, and this is like the banquet of your deeds at the end of the day. And and like you just said, like you put yourself in a certain trajectory. Now you could say like, oh, but this is how my father raised me, and that's why we're also framing this at the free will at the end of the day. You have these choices. You have to recognize that, like, while the whole world is your platter and you can play with it. And we spoke about the whole concept of the free will and what the limitations are. So once we explain to you how the game works, now you have to realize like we're doing this and you're preparing this meal with the decisions you're making. Because eventually all these are courses and appetizers and the drinks and the flowers, but eventually you're going to want to present this meal. And, God is going to sit down and ask you like, okay, are you co-signing that this is the meal you prepared? And then you're going to get Gordon Ramsay's, right? So he's either going to tell you that this is amazing, or he's going to tell you you're fired, get out of the kitchen. This is rubbish, right? So I think, we have to deal with that. And just back to to the Gordon Ramsay, he asks them, he's like, and this is crap. And then like, there, yes, chef. He's like, you know why it's crap? And they're like, why? He's like, because you rushed the fondue and he did the thing, and like those were the consequences. And he starts answering. He's like, well, I didn't think I would have enough time to bake that. He's like, you didn't think so. So without your knowledge or with your knowledge, like you didn't assess the situation properly. And you had the tools before you came on here to learn about how fondue works and what the temperature is and what tools we're going to be using over here. But you were distracted because you were looking at, you either had drama with one of the female contestants, or you had ego and you wanted to win, or you thought you're going to joke around and you're not going to take it seriously enough. So then you find yourself obviously off the show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think maybe to try to connect this to the beginning here of the net is spread over all the living. When you explained it at the beginning, that it struck me because this is, somebody asked me about why do you need, like they asked me, why am I learning more and involved in more, let's say, religious stuff, or learning more Torah? And one way that I explain it is actually thinking about a net. Torah is a net. And it's kind of connected to also what we spoke here at the end about doing, about, you don't know the payment that life is taking from you. And Torah, in a way, is like a net, because when you're young, when you're old, when you're rich, when you're poor, when you're able, when you're disabled, when you are trying to optimize for having a good career, or trying to optimize for having a family, it's always there for you with all of these Torah as this as tradition, as wisdom, as various different tools. And it's always there, as opposed to you just rationally trying to think from your specific perspective at this moment, right? So at this moment, various things are important to me. Like, I live in Texas, so there's a specific context that is important to me. I'm married now, so there are another specific context, but I can't account for what will happen in the future. So I don't know. So so I can try to live from my kind of like a very narrow vantage point at this point, or I can kind of look at this more, or I can use the net that will be able to capture all of my incarnations, or all of my versions of, or all of my whatever you want to call them, avatars throughout my life.
So, well, got it. I mean, first of all, so here you're talking about, let's say, a positive net versus the other net, which is saying, like, you might want your positive net because they're telling you there's a negative net, which is like you just said, I don't know what it's going to be like in 10 years. And this negative net is telling you that the net is spread out over all the living, right? Kol hachaim in Hebrew means throughout all your life, which is saying, right, you don't know what's going to be in 10 years, but you could bet you that there's going to be evil temptations in 10 years, which are different than the ones you have right now. Right. So thinking that you could like rest on your laurels right now and be like, I'm going to just keep it on this way, you have to be like, you constantly need to be growing. And the attitude is you being like, well, I'm not sure. That's part of the ha'chenvani makif. You have this space of this uncertainty, which is also this freedom, right? Like during this uncertainty, move to Texas, live in Israel, do whatever you want. But there's a credit. I'm watching. Things are going to change. And like you have to realize, and this goes all the way back to the image.
Yeah.
You recognize that you are the image, and you recognize that you're conscious of this, right? The Maharal would be like, and then you recognize that it's not only like Maimonides talks about, like, it's all about the brain palace and your soul, and forget like this body. Maharal would be like, no, recognize the image and then embody it through like literally embody it, have this connection where you can now manifest these things on the world. But God is going to tell you that doing so, I've given you a Torah, a guidebook, which will allow you to take these things into consideration. Because you saying, I don't know, I didn't know at the end of the day, God is going to tell you, like, I gave you math, I gave you cause and effect, I gave you the Torah, I gave you all these elements. And I told you, like we said, Shafilu ba'astara shebetocha astara. I'm always there.
Yeah.
I'm always around, even if you can't see me. I think we'll stop.